Welcome to the franchise, the Cowboys Ultimate Insider Show. I'm Charean Williams, and this is Rick Goslin back with you yet again. We are DFW's only Hall of Fame voters, and today we're going to talk about the offensive line, how important it is to win with, and how the Cowboys have so much talent and money tied up in their offensive line. Rick, we voted in Larry Allen a few years ago into the Hall of Fame. Rayfield Wright's in the Hall of Fame. Even the John Giesiks and Ralph Neely's and Blaine Nyes and all those guys, Mark Stepnoski, that the Cowboys have had, when they've won, it seems like they've won with a good offensive line. And it seems like that throughout history, that teams that win have a good offensive line.
Yeah, especially in the NFC East. You go back to Joe Gibbs, he had the Hogs. Joe Jacoby is left tackle on 3 Super Bowl champion teams, 11 years apart. When the Giants won with Bill Parcells, they had some great blocking front. Brad Button, they had the best blocking tight end in football, maybe the last true blocking tight end in Mark Bavaro. Jumbo Elliott, Brad Benson, Bart Oates, great. Cowboys in the 90s, maybe the best offensive line in history. And they did it with discards. You know, there were no #1 draft picks. They had Nate and Matt, Mark Tuinei were undrafted. Stepnoski and Gogan were 3rd-round draft picks. Eric Williams, 3rd-round draft picks. They did it with guys that just they were a cohesive unit. And then you look at Eagles last year. A lot of people thought they had the best blocking front in football. They had 4 players that had been to Pro Bowls on their starting offensive line. In the NFC East, especially in this division where the weather gets cold and you got to run the ball, you need to be more physical late in the year. In the NFC East, the team with the best offensive line is a team that is the greatest reward.
Bill Parcells' philosophy was always to build with those lines, offensive line and defensive line, and he felt like if you could get those 2 parts in place, you would have a really good football team. And it seems to have gone over that's kind of the way it is through history. And the Cowboys had that in the 90s, as you said, with all those guys. And then they couldn't find those discard type players. Right. And they weren't drafting them, so they weren't there. And I think that was part of their problem with winning after the 95 season. The reason they've gone a long stretch, because they didn't put the money, they didn't put the draft picks, they didn't put anything into that offensive line. They thought they could do it the Jimmy Johnson way, but hey, Jimmy Johnson was gone.
Yeah, it helps when you've got the best offensive line in football and the best running back in football. You can win a lot of games, a lot of championships that way, but as Emmett got older and the offensive line declined, the Cowboys declined. And until they decided, you know, we got to start drafting offensive linemen, they didn't get fixed until fairly in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, and it's tough to win without that. As we've seen, and with what the Cowboys went through injury-wise last season and changes on their line, you have to have that cohesiveness. And it takes a while, doesn't it, to really get that. For a line has to play together a while. To get that cohesiveness, to play well together. You can't just bring guys in and put them in there and all of a sudden they're going to click and play really well.
And that was the Hogs of Joe Gibbs with Bostic and Jacoby and Grimm. They played together for the better part of a decade. In 1991, when they won their last Super Bowl, they allowed only 9 sacks. They had an elite running game, and they allowed only 9 sacks. You've got to not only block for the run, but you've got to protect your quarterback. The Cowboys right now, Prescott was sacked 32 times. I think you've got to get your sacks between 15 and 25 times. The most that Troy Aikman was ever sacked in a Super Bowl season was 26. So the Cowboys have to get those sacks down, and they've got the investment in these offensive linemen. It's going to be on them to reduce the sacks and get Elliott another rushing title.
Yeah, and if they can do that, they have a chance to have a good season. They have a chance to keep the defense off the field, but it is going to come down to the play of that offensive line. And frankly, they weren't that good last season. They didn't live up to their title as the best offensive line in football.
And look at the division. Giants, they spent big money to get Nate Solder, left tackle. They used a high 2nd-round pick on Will Hernandez. They know you got to have the offensive line to win. The Redskins, they got Trent Williams and Brandon Scherf, 2 high draft picks. Sean Luava was a high-priced free agent. Everybody in this division is building that line. And they realize that in this division, in the cold weather, you got to run the ball. You got to protect your quarterback. And there are now 4 really good lines in this division. And where do the Cowboys fit? We're going to find out this season.
And it's a good point, because they have spent a lot of money in draft picks in this division on offensive lines. And, the Giants now have brought in Nate Solder. Again, it may take them a little bit of time with what they've done with their line. They've moved some guys around at the guard positions and really only have, I think, 1 true guy returning, which is their center. Otherwise, they kind of have a rebuilt line. It may take a little bit of time to get that cohesiveness. But the Eagles are really good, and the Washington is really good with what they've built there. And so Dallas, if they are going to live up to that reputation as the best offensive line, they're going to have to be the best offensive line in their division.
And that's going to be a tough challenge this year. So next up, we're heading out to the Star, talk a little more offensive line for the rest of the show.
Connor, you're converting obviously from left tackle to left guard. How's the transition gone so far?
I mean, it hasn't been too difficult, and the O-line's been very helpful with me and me asking questions. Zach's been very helpful and been a good coach to me and transitioning to guard. And so just trying to learn all I can and do my best.
Do you have a chip on your shoulder being in second round when so many people are projected to be in the first?
I mean, I can't look at it that way. I mean, I'm more than, beyond thankful and beyond humble to be able to even be here and be home. And so to be part of the Dallas Cowboys is a dream come true, so that doesn't even cross my mind.
How do you benefit playing next to a Pro Bowl center like Frederick?
I mean, it definitely helps. It definitely helps with transition. If I come off and ask any question, he's got a response for me. So it's a good transition. It's good. It's a good mentoring opportunity for him to teach me.
Is there communication on the field in the huddle?
Yes, definitely.
How good does this offensive line have the potential to be with 5 really first-round talents? 3 guys who use first round, and you allow Collins with first-round ability?
I think the rest of the line is, it speaks for themselves what they've been able to do, and so they're just an amazing, hard-working group of guys, and so it's exciting to watch them and be able to come and work every day.
Well, they tell me that this is the healthiest he's been in 3 years, so I'm really excited about that. I'm trying a few techniques with him, which are a little bit should help him a little bit, and but other than that, he gets up there and it's like, wow, it's just, do it like he did.
Emmitt Smith told me the most important guy in the offensive line in the running game is the center. How much of an advantage is it for you to have a multi-time Pro Bowl center?
For me, it's great. I've never had a center this good. And not only is he extremely talented and extremely productive, I darn near every week he grades 90%, but he's just bright as heck, and he's a really smart guy.
You really can't go wrong when you draft a Wisconsin lineman, can you?
Some people have when they drafted him a decade ago when they were big and slow and couldn't move, but recently those Wisconsin guys are really good.
Joe Thomas a decade ago was pretty
Joe
good.
Thomas is good. Kevin Zeitler's good.
You got some good ones.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the franchise. We're talking more offensive line and specifically the Cowboys offensive line. And Rick, we talked about the Cowboys, especially Jerry Jones. His philosophy was he thought he could do it the Jimmy Johnson way and do it with discards. And then finally they decided, okay, we can't do this, and used the 9th overall pick on Tyron Smith and figured out he was pretty good and said, all right, well, we'll draft a center in the first round. And they took Travis Frederick the first round, late in the first round. And then it was Zach Martin the first round. And now all of a sudden, this football team has 5 first-round caliber players on the offensive line, and they have a lot of money invested in this offensive line. Is it a good investment where they are right now?
Well, I'm surprised they're going to pay all 3 of these guys. So they're going to have over $200 million tied up in 3 players, all on the blocking front. Usually you don't pay guards, you pay your tackles. The Cowboys have paid a center, they're going to pay a guard now. There's a lot of money tied up. There's a sizable investment in this being the best offensive line of football. For what they're paying for these guys and the premium picks that they use for them, this has to be the best offensive line of football. This is now when Jimmy was here, the team was, the part of the team was the skill players. Right now the heart of this team is the offensive line. They have to be the best for the Cowboys to resurrect. 2
years ago they were that. They lived up to that reputation. And then Ron Leary left in free agency because they thought, well, they have Lyle Collins. We can't afford to pay Ron Leary. We understand that. And then, though, Doug Free retired, which they didn't expect. So now they moved Collins to right tackle last season. They have no left guard, and they kind of threw left guards in there. And then Jonathan Cooper wasn't the answer. And then we talk about Tyron Smith getting hurt over there at left tackle. that was not the same offensive line we had seen last season, and that was part of the Cowboys' problem last year, was those guys were not as good as they had been on the offensive line. Everybody talks about Elliott being out, but the offensive line was not as good either.
Yeah, even with Elliott gone, with the money they were paying and the investment in the offensive line, they should have been able to run the ball with fairly good success, and that wasn't the case. And the fact they couldn't run the ball impacted the quarterback play. If Dak Prescott doesn't have a running game, Dak is not going to be the quarterback he was 2 years earlier. So, what I like about this offensive line, in drafting, you draft tackles. You don't necessarily take guards. Guards aren't a high priority because if a tackle doesn't make it, he can wash into guard. If you draft a guard, he doesn't make it, there's nowhere place for him to go. What I like about this front, the Cowboys have 4 left tackles starting on the offensive line. Zach Martin was a left tackle, Connor Williams is a left tackle, Lyle Collins is a left tackle, and Tyron Smith was left tackle. They've got 4 very talented players with maybe the best center in football. There's no reason, if they stay healthy, that this shouldn't be the best offensive line in football. And if they have an injury like last year when they lost Smith in the Atlanta game, you can slide Williams out. You can slide Lyle Collins out. You shouldn't have that same problem you had last year.
Yeah, it was the Tyron Smith injury in that Atlanta game, and it was open season on Dak Prescott. And they said at that point, we have to get better on the offensive line, even though we have this big investment on the offensive line. And Tyron has had those injuries the last 2 years with the back and various other injuries, and has been out some games. So they did go invest and drafted Connor Williams in the second round. He was a left tackle at Texas. He'll move inside to play left guard. How is that transition, and how long will it take him to adjust to guard? It didn't seem to take Zach Martin very long to fit in there.
Now, historically, it takes 2 or 3 years for offensive line to mesh. And that's why the Redskins were so great with those Hogs. They were there forever. They knew by feel what each one's going to do. It's going to be an adjustment period with Tyron, with Frederick, with Connor Williams on that side. There's still an adjustment period going on with Martin and Collins on the one side. But if Tyron has early injuries, that's going to set the whole thing back, because one of those guys got to slide out, and the whole plan is going to get disrupted. But I think it's, especially in the first couple weeks of the season, it's going to be a bit of a struggle as the rookie learns what his left tackle is going to do, what his center is going to do in every situation.
Tyron Smith has had those back injuries. Back injuries don't go away, and he's only 27 years old. But is there some concern now with the contract he has, and he has a lot of years left on that deal, that he's not going to make it to the end of that deal? He's got 4 years left on that deal, I think. Is there some concern there with him at left tackle that this may be an ongoing thing, and maybe he's not going to be the same guy over a 16-game stretch in a season now?
Yeah, if there isn't concern, there should be a concern. I mean, in the last 2 seasons, he's missed 3 games apiece. His body's breaking down. He's 27 years old. He's not that old. When they gave him that 8-year contract in 2014, they thought, we're going to have this really good player, this Pro Bowl caliber player, into the next decade. And that's not going to happen with him. You talk about the back. He also had hip, groin, knee injuries, and that's all tied together. You know, when the back's not functioning, everything else tries to compensate. So it's going to be, you better hold your breath that he can get 16 games in. If he's playing 60 games, he's a Pro Bowl caliber player. He went to the Pro Bowl last year. He didn't have a Pro Bowl season. He has to stay healthy for this thing to work. If he doesn't stay healthy, you got to start shuffling people around. And that's too much money invested in one player for it not to work with Tyron Smith.
If that Cowboys offensive line stays healthy, if this could be a pretty good football team and a pretty good offensive football team, but there's a lot of ifs there. So we're going to see moving forward.
Yes, if they're healthy, he should win another rushing title.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the franchise, the Cowboys Ultimate Insider Show. We'll see you next time.